call to order this meeting of the City of Davis Climate and Environmental Justice Commission for March 23rd. Good evening, everyone. So let's go ahead and have our roll call. I will just note for the record that Commissioners Murray and Byrne are not in attendance this evening, and the remainder of the commissioners are all here. And from there, I think we will move on to item number 2, approval of the agenda. And I'm sorry, Sam, correctly, did we take public comment on the agenda for tonight? Did we know, correct?
No, you don't have public comment.
Thank you.
No.
Okay. All right, and so I will also note that item 6B tonight, commission initiated task process, was added to our agenda last week after some discussion within this group. Considering that we are missing a third of our membership, I would propose that we table that item for a future meeting to get us started on discussion of the agenda and open that up for discussion.
So if you want a motion absent that, and then vote.
I make a motion that we accept the agenda absent item B and saving that for a future meeting.
A second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And so do we need a separate motion to table 6B and bring that back? Okay, perfect. In that case, we will turn to the next item on our agenda, which will be brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and council liaisons. I'm going to go ahead and start with announcements from commissioners this evening. Any commissioner announcements? All right, hearing none. So let's go to noting that we do not have our council liaisons here this evening. Let's go to staff and see if we have any brief announcements from staff.
Yeah, just one brief one. Just wanted to note that Heat Pump Week is April 11th to 19th. This is put on by the California Heat Pump Partnership, which is a public-private entity. The goal of the overall partnership is installing 6 million heat pumps in California by 2030. And so this will be really focused on like statewide activation, including events, contractor celebrations, and outreaching to promoting awareness for heat pumps. So that's April 11th to 19th, put on by the California Heat Pump Partnership. That's all I got.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. We learned something new today. All right, and it looks like Councilwoman Neville is able to join us, so I'll give her a moment to get situated. But Councilwoman Neville, do you have any brief announcements for us? That is where we're at.
I do not. Thank you.
Excellent. So no announcements from council liaisons. So we will move on to item number 4, public comment. And so this will be public comment on non-agendized items, and we will keep the comment period to 3 minutes. So please, members of the public.
Alan Hirsch, could you pass this on? Commissioner, thank you so much, and here's what the staff too. Support science. First item is basically, we are in a climate crisis. The city has not really implemented things, but the federal government has basically denied climate change, rolled back EV rules or whatever, and I think the city and this commission should initiate a letter from the city objecting to that. Because that's the primal thing. Your whole thing is about climate, environmental justice and climate. So I think you should initiate a letter, just like we put a sanctuary city, saying you should initiate a letter from the city, ask the city to write a letter objecting to that. One. Second, very specifically, you are the owners of the tree issue. There should be, this is the most important decision about trees in the entire year is coming up in the next couple months. That's how much we're going to fund the tree planting in the coming year. We should know, we're at the end of tree planting season right now. We know exactly how many trees we planted this year. We should know right now. We should know how many we've removed, 2 so far. So we should know, are we falling behind or are we getting ahead of the tree planting average? And where are the trees going? Are we taking trees out, street trees out and putting them in parks? Where's the shift? And are we planting trees in social equity, in impacted neighborhoods, or are you still planting them in rich neighborhoods? College Park has a wonderful tree canopy, but the apartment neighborhoods do not. There should be accountability. You should be asking, I urge you, put this on your next agenda and report from the city arborist about tree planting. What's happened? How are we doing? Have we kept, last year we fell 100 trees behind. We removed more trees than we planted. Are we catching up? Are we even staying even? You should ask that question. Ask where they're planted. I have written a letter to you. It'll be passed out that asks the questions. And please, on your agenda, don't have it just a report. Have it an action item so you can take action. Otherwise, you're just neutered. You just hear things and you can't make any action. You should be empowered, we should ask staff to empower you so you can do things. You can write that letter, make that an action item, you can basically get a report and respond to that. And you should respond to council, you individually, if you can't do it as a commission, show up at city council with budget areas and insist that there be enough money to plant replacement trees to basically keep up with it. We don't fall any further behind on the tree planting in our city. Please do that. This is the legacy. You walk around downtown, and there are more signs than there are trees at this point, it seems like. We aren't planting trees even in our precious downtown area to shade it. G Street still needs trees. We spent all this money on the furniture, but we don't have shade there. Trees are so important to our environment, our community, and social equity. So please ask for an accounting, ask for a report. This should be part of the urban forest management plan. You should be asking for this. This is your job. If you don't ask for it, nobody's going to do it. It's on you guys' watch. Please do that. And the long range agenda asks that a tree report be put forward with this sort of detail. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your volunteer service. I know this is a lot of effort, but please make it count. Thank you. And also, if you want to support science signs, I have a bunch of them. I give them out in the farmer's market. This is really important, and I'll see you all at No King's Day this Saturday.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments from members of the public? We are still in public comment, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. And Justice Commission. My name is Min Wan. I was a commissioner for the Historical Resources Management Committee for 5 years, and I was come out last summer. So I want to share a couple of. I'm a resident of Davis. I moved to Davis in 1992, so that's a very long time. I raised 2 children here. I am the granddaughter of last Chinese Empire. I'm the legal owner of a huge farm called the New One Soul Park. I believe support the city of Davis operation. And I've been here many times. I have been talking about, I believe Jenny can steal money from me. Okay, so Jenny Han was here when I questioned, Jenny Tan. Jenny Han, it's a long history. Chinese Empire's family, and Jenny Tan was the nanny for my twin brother, and actually kidnapped my twin brother to Communist China. And then that's the beginning. I'm not going to talk about that long story. I want to share a couple of things. There's a new bill has passed the House. It's called HR 881, Department of Homeland Security. It's called a Restriction on Confucius Institute and the Chinese Entity of Concern Act. I want to make people aware. I was arrested on October 29th when the police approached me. They don't look like American, and they don't even look like the police I'm familiar with, because my son with Tim Davis, every year the police officer gave award for the Special Olympics. I'm kind of, has a good relationship with the Davis Police Department before. So I believe what happened is that there is an organization, it's called Confucius Institute. Supposedly, it's closed in UC Davis, but I believe the change name does still operates. And it's C and I that call themselves openly, in Chinese community, CIA. And here, Chinese entities of concern actually does spies, and I believe they're also in our community, and they're not even human. The Chinese Communist Party or Confucius Institute, the AI can make women look so real, you just cannot tell the difference. So this is in Chinese. Another thing is, because I have, so to arrest me and they don't have warranty, I believe it's against the Fourth Amendment of my Constitution rights. But anyway, I have to go to court many times. There's a lawsuit. So I found out this organization called ALA, it's American Lawyers Alliance, and they are spouse of lawyers and
And
just.
that's the 3-minute timer right there.
Okay, thank you. I want to let you know it's called Chinese Communist Party, CCP, Mrs. Simpson's clan, the Chinese entity of concerns spies in our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right. Do we have any other comments from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our consent calendar. So consent calendar are routine items. It looks like today we only have item 5A, which is approval of the commission minutes. And then, but I believe we will open public comment on the consent calendar. No, okay. No public comment on the consent calendar. So,
So I'll move that we adopt the minutes, we approve the consent calendar.
Second?
we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you, Jim.
With a comment there, whoever's taking the minutes is doing an excellent job.
Nice work, Sam. All right, so we will move on to our regular agenda items, and today the first item on our list is the urban water management plan, item 6A. So I will turn it over to staff for a brief presentation, then we will do clarifying questions from the commission, followed by public comment and discussion and action. So I'll turn it over to staff.
Yeah, so brief introduction, Don Castellanos with our internal team, Water Conservation Coordinator. Adrian's sitting back in the back. Dawn's a member of her team associated with water conservation. So, and then Melanie's here from Brown and Caldwell to provide the presentation. They're the consultant that we've brought on board to complete the management plan, and she's going to walk you through it.
Good evening. So, Stan said, my name is Melanie Holton. I'm a civil engineer with Brown Caldwell, and I'm going to walk you through what this plan is and a summary, high-level summary of what's included in it. Oh, that's okay. So we're going to go over the Urban Water Management Planning Act, and then we'll really walk through the different components of the system, from the system description down to the water shortage contingency plan, and next steps at this point in the update cycle for the Urban Water Management Plan. So the Urban Water Management Planning Act, a lot of times we just say the Act, it's of 1983 and it has had multiple updates since that time. The Act requires that any purveyor, water agency serving more than 3,000 customers or 3,000 acre feet per year is required to submit an urban water management plan, and they are due every 5 years. So years ending in 0 and 5, they're due. So this is the update of the 2025 urban water management plan, and it includes data through the end of 2025. So it's actually due by July 1st to the Department of Water Resources. And so there haven't been any changes in the Act since 2020, so this 2025 plan is truly an update of the 2020 without new requirements. In 2020, there were a lot of new requirements from the previous period. And the Department of Water Resources requires, they have a guidebook, they require specific tables in the Urban Water Management Plan, and they even have a checklist that we include as Appendix A to tell them, you know, what page or what table each of those items are in that are required in the Act. So you'll see in the Urban Water Management Plan, we'll have our table number, but in parentheses it might say DWR table X. That's their table from their guidebook. So we just want to make it as easy as we can for them to connect, you know, where the items are in the document. And this is a planning document for regulatory compliance. So just kind of a detailed overview of what's in the plan. It really is about documenting your water demands, and we're talking annual water demands, comparing those to your supplies. So we're not getting into facility sizes or flow rates. It's really what you have on an annual basis in terms of demand and supplies, and then comparing those. And there's a bit of a stress test to analyze your water supply reliability, not just in normal years, but in dry years or a drought scenario. And so that's the guts of the content. There's a lot of details in each of those categories. And then the activities associated with the plan is notifying the public that there is going to be a public hearing, reaching out to your wholesaler, the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency, just to make sure that what you're saying they're going to give you in the future is what they're saying they're going to give you in the future, because they have to do an urban water management plan too. And then the plan is reviewed, it's taken to a public hearing and adopted and submitted to the Department of Water Resources by July 1st. So the water system description, this is just a nice graphic to show you your water service area is in blue. The red outline is the city boundary. And so you'll see, for the most part, your service area matches your city boundary, but there are some CSAs outside of that. And we do show North Davis Meadows on here, although you're not connected to them yet. So population and connection projections, the DWR, or the Act does require you to project out your population, and we like to show connections also. And we show the growth, most of the growth happening. There's a list of new developments that are included in the planning of this analysis, and so that you see that rise through 2035 for those new developments and the population associated with the residential connections. This is it can be a little wild at first when you look at it, but this is the monthly water use in the city since 2013, and we started at 2013 because we want to show that year in 2013 is considered pre-drought, pre-2013, 2015 drought, and you can see what the water use was, up to 500 million gallons per month, for that highest month of the year. And then as years have gone, as the drought hit, your demands decreased significantly. And while there has been some comeback, your demands have never gone back to their pre-2013, 2015 drought levels. And so the blue is a plot of the monthly demand, and then the orange is the average demand for each of those blue years. Historical water loss. So water loss is one of the standards that the state has in place. So we use data from your water loss reports that you certify submit every year using the AWWA, American Water Works Association water loss forms. And so, we're showing your water loss broken down between your physical real losses, and that's in blue, and that's from leaks and things that you're doing right now to reduce in your system by replacing water mains. But the orange shows, it's another type of loss. It's unbilled authorized consumption. So that would be like from flushing or maintenance activities, planned activities. It could also be, they call them apparent losses. It could be from meter inaccuracies or whatnot. And so that's a smaller percentage. But overall here in 2025, you've seen a trend of reduction in your water loss, and that's a result of the work that you've been doing in your system. So just that same graph, and I should note on the y-axis it's gallons per day per connection. So this is in gallons per day per water system connection. The state, there is a standard that you're supposed to meet by 2028 for real water loss, and that's 31.1 gallons per day per connection, and you're already meeting that at 21.9 as of 2025. And I think you're just about at the apparent water loss. That's a newer standard. The focus has really been on the real water loss from leaks and things that can be prevented. Okay, so I mentioned that water loss standard. That's one component of, I'm not sure if you've heard the urban water use objectives. Okay, so UWUO, not zero. And I just wanted to show this because it can be a little bit misleading. You think, well, okay, if we meet all the water use objectives, like the sum of those are what our objective is overall. But I just wanted to point out the water use objectives cover indoor and outdoor residential, outdoor CII, which is commercial, industrial, institutional, so non-residential outdoor usage, and then your physical, real system water loss. The two sectors that don't have urban water use objectives yet are the indoor usage for commercial, industrial, institutional, and apparent losses. So we estimate, okay, what you're doing there for those two, you'll continue to do, and so that we can come up with an overall water use goal for the city, or we can at least tell you what your total water use goal is, considering those urban water use objectives plus those two categories that aren't included as objectives. And so right now, your overall water use in 2025, that goal is 146 GPCD, and by 2050, meeting those urban water use objectives, and then assuming a certain usage on those use types that don't have water use objectives, you would be required to be down to 125 gallons per capita per day by 2050. And I'll have a graph later that compares all these. But while we're on the topic of reducing water use, the projected water savings from your conservation program and from passive savings assumed to occur from standards and ordinances, including those urban water use objectives, those are all included in your water demand projections. So demand management measures, this is the program that Dawn runs for public education and outreach. The city follows along, it really conducts the program under the state's Conserve Water, Rain or Shine, the Save Our Water program. You leverage what the state is doing for messaging, but you also have city-run programs for all of these. You have your water waste prevention ordinance, and you're completely metered, and you have conservation pricing in effect. But your public outreach and public education outreach is a significant component of getting behavioral changes in place to help meet your objectives and just to help use water efficiently. And so the theme of late has been messaging to plan for extreme weather patterns. That incorporates the Save Our Water program messaging from the state. The city conducts social media blasts, website information, there's e-newsletters, public events occur and are part of this program, and there's a presence from the Water Distribution System Conservation Program to help from every angle, or from multiple angles, try to get the Save Our Water message home. So back to your demand projections and what we're projecting in this urban water management plan. This graph shows water demand on the y-axis. It shows the acre feet per year. And then every year through 2050, from the start of the drought in 2013 through 2050. In this urban water management plan, the state requires you to go through 2045 with an option to go another 5 years. The city goes through 2050 to include that additional 5 years. But this graph is interesting because it shows your historical production, and the black line that goes through the graph is your demand that's being projected in this document. And so you can see how we started, over 12,000 acre feet per year in 2013, and we're projecting to go back up as those approved and unapproved water systems, water supply assessment developments are in place. So we are including that pink swath, that is for the developments that are accounted for in the urban water management plan, but they're not yet approved. And we'd like to include those because we can compare them to your water supply to confirm that you do have enough water supply. But this graph also shows what your demand would be if you didn't have a conservation program in place, or if you didn't achieve those expected savings from passive water savings. And so we're currently just under 10,000 acre feet up to a little over 12,000 acre feet by 2050. Okay, and then another graph, this one is on the y-axis, it's the per capita water use, and this is in gallons per capita per day. So this is a busy one, but it's in the report, so I wanted to walk you through it. The blue line that starts up at the top around 250, and then it goes all the way to 2050, that is your actual, it's your historical and your projected gallons per capita per day, based on the demands in this plan and based on the population that we're projecting. And, but just to walk you down, your average GPCD from 1995 to 2005 was way up there at 215. In 2020, you were required to meet a 20% reduction down at 172 GPCD, that's that red dashed line. And then the NRC, when that commission was in place, set a target of even better than the 20 by 2020, down at 134 GPCD. And then considering the cap goal of, I believe it's 10% below what your 2010 water use was, that equates to 104 GPCD. You can see all of those requirements, those different various goals are your actual projected water use. That blue line is below all of those. So we're still showing that you're going to meet that. The urban water use objective included in that little dotted purple line, the overall water use goal, that one does go a little bit under what your projected demands are. So the city's going to have to determine, okay, what do we need to do to get that, so we're below that. And I would say, our demand projections include a lot of new growth for some of these areas, and I think the city's going to monitor what those demands actually are. We might have those overestimated, we're not sure at this point. So climate change is a section that's required to be discussed in the urban water management plan. It can be qualitatively, we did quantify and account for impacts of of climate change on your demand and your supply. In the demand section, we included, we adjusted the outdoor water use, so the landscape water use, by an additional 5% into the future, assuming that the impacts of climate change would result in that, and they're projected to occur by mid-century. We include those in every year of the projections. And then the impacts to supply, we're assuming that you would see 900 acre-feet per year less on average in your surface water supply. So we shaved 900 acre-feet off of that surface water supply, assuming you'll, as a result of climate change, you will have that much less per year in the future. So those are included in the planning in this document. So just to go over your system water supplies, you have I should have spelled it out, Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency, and you've been purchasing surface water since 2016, and have 11,425 acre-feet per year in normal year supply. So that's the average for the year. Groundwater, you are part of the Yolo Subbasin Groundwater Agency and are part of the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan that was required as a part of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so the city's supply of 12,800 acre-foot per year is really based on an analysis of, okay, what your demands are, the pattern of your demands over the year, and what you're likely able to take based on that demand pattern and the capacity of your system. And then there's recycled water that we do discuss it, we're required to discuss it in the urban water management plan. We don't show any recycled water used now or in the future within your service area to replace potable demands, although the city, you do use it outside your surface area, which is a benefit to your groundwater basin. System water supplies. Other system water supplies that the urban water management plan requires you to discuss are exchanges and transfers and future water projects. We don't show any for those categories at the time. And then we are required to calculate your energy intensity. So we show 321 kilowatts per hour per million gallons of water used in your system as a result of the groundwater pumped and the booster pumping. It doesn't include the energy intensity of the surface water treatment plant, just in your distribution system, and the water produced by you, which is the groundwater. Okay, so looking at water demands combined with the supply that you have in different year types is really where everything culminates in this document. And so this graph shows in acre-feet per year. It shows a stack of your supplies. So in a normal year, in a dry year, and then in multiple dry years, 1 through 5. So we show the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency surface water supply first. That's the light blue on the bottom. So we use that first, And we show, you can see it decreasing in a single dry year, and then also to a lesser amount in multiple dry years. And then the groundwater supply from your deep wells is shown on top of that in the darker blue. And then you can see the potential future climate change reduction. We just show that on the top just to show how much higher your supply stack would be if you didn't have a reduction due to climate change in the future. And then the orange line across is your demand. And so, as you can see, you do need to use your groundwater wells even in normal years to meet demands. But this is, on the average annual for each year type. And there's no shortages expected. You're able to meet demands in all year types. Okay, so another way, this was a new requirement in 2020, there's a drought risk assessment in the urban water management plan. So after you've analyzed that normal year, that single dry year, and the multiple dry years, then they want you to take a look at, okay, what if you chose several drought scenarios? What could happen? And so we look at 3 of those, and then you're required to pick the one with the kind of the worst case and analyze that and compare that to your demands from 2026 through 2030. And in any of those years, are you lacking supply? Do you need to enact your water shortage contingency plan to maybe reduce your demands or augment your supply? So we in scenario 2, you see 2A and 2B, we looked down not just at the annual level, but we also looked at the monthly level, because we know when your surface water is reduced during term 91, that amount available to the city can vary even month to month. So we didn't want to just assume over the year you were okay. We wanted to look at that on a monthly basis, because there can be issues during some where demand could be higher than supply in some months of the year. So there's a couple graphs on that in the plan. And but overall, your demand still can be met even in that situation. You only have 78% of your supply available, even from a month-to-month basis. You're able to meet demands without increasing the stage that you're in your water shortage contingency plan. Okay, and this is just to show, this is really the same as it was last time. In 2020, or shortly thereafter, you were required to submit annual water supply and demand assessments. And so this is really the process. But by July 1st, you are required, every year, you're required to submit this annual assessment report to the Department of Water Resources to say, hey, for this year and the next year, we're looking ahead. We're considering what our supplies are and what our demand is, what our demand could be. And we're either looking good or we're not, and this is what we're going to do about it. And then lastly, the water shortage contingency plan, that is a component of the urban water management plan, and the way it's configured in the document, it's a chapter of the document, but it is required to be adopted separately in your public hearing, but it is all in one document. And this purpose of this slide is really just to show you the different components. The Act really lays out what's included in the water shortage contingency plan, so it's quite a long chapter, but it is required to have all these items discussed. And this urban water management plan includes the water shortage contingency plan elements that were updated in 2023 by the Natural Resources Commission. But the water supply reliability analysis, there's a summary of that, that annual supply and demand assessment workflow diagram I just showed you is in there. But the guts of this is the water shortage response, like what the city is planning to do in each stage of a water shortage contingency plan to reduce your demands. And so there, in 2020 was the first time that the state was requesting that you estimate what your savings is, what your reduction in water use is at for each of those activities. And so different activities impact different water uses. And so those, there's in the appendix, there's more details from the spreadsheet of what was assumed for each of those activities. What would you be saving in each use type, indoor or outdoor? And then there's the water shortage contingency plan also discusses communication and compliance and what you're going to do to refine this and how you adopt it. So one more slide on the water shortage contingency plan. This is just, you do have, these are the state standard stages, and the city aligns well with those. And I just wanted to note that the city is always in level 1. You're always acting as if you could have an up to 10% shortage. So the activities described for that stage 1 are always in effect. Okay, and then, so just to wrap it up, we're at the point where we're bringing this to you, and then the next step will be to take it, to put the plan out for public review, go to the city council for public adoption, or public hearing for an adoption, and then at that point, once comments are incorporated, the final document will be submitted to DWR, posted on the city's website, and then the implementation occurs, and the places where there's implementation is the city continuing to report on your annual water loss, doing those annual supply and demand assessments, updating your water shortage contingency plan as necessary, or implementing it if you need to go to another stage, and then continuing to evolve and implement your demand management measures, your conservation program. And so, yep, and submittal to DWR by July 1st. And I believe the council meeting is scheduled for May 19th for the public hearing for this. That's it.
So a lot of information in a short period of time, but happy to take any questions or have a discussion.
Thank you, Stan, and thank you, Melanie. So yeah, let's go to clarifying questions from the commission. I'll start with you, Ann.
Not at this time.
Sarah?
Not at this time, thank you.
Yeah?
Yes. But I want to congratulate on a very impressive report. It certainly demonstrates how complicated this whole thing is, and it successfully demonstrated how ignorant I am. But I do have a couple of questions. One has to do with groundwater supply. Several years ago, I don't remember how long ago or where I read this report, but I read a report about trying to estimate the aquifer, the groundwater availability in Yolo County, and I had the impression that they were largely uncertain, that it was hard to measure. They didn't know how much it varied year to year, how much there was or anything. It seemed like an unknown quantity, really. Now, maybe they've improved a great deal on technique, measurements and so on, but I'm just curious how you came up with and how reliable are the measurements of groundwater. And I guess I'll add a follow-up supplement to that. To what extent are we exposed to what happens outside of Davis? I have a friend who has a farm and the neighbor planted almond trees, and all of a sudden my friend's well went dry. If farmers in Yolo County started doing things, would our access to groundwater diminish?
I can answer the second one first. So the aquifer that we pull from, typically most irrigation is not pulled from in the area. It's much shallower. So we pull from the deep aquifer almost exclusively now, which is below 700 feet down to 1,500 or even a little deeper than that. So most irrigation wells are well above that. So they're different streams. And then the sub-basin that was mentioned, the groundwater sub-basin plan.
Sustainability.
Yeah, the sustainability plan. Sorry, I'm a lot of acronyms. That looks at our sub-basin holistically. So it actually looks at what they've installed a pretty extensive monitoring network over the years as part of that plan to better gauge what are the impacts from the withdrawals, how are we looking at different droughts and those things. So a lot of that work is ongoing. So moving forward, we'll have that better data. But from a perspective of our municipal supply in the deep aquifer, we have not seen impacts to this point. Obviously, during drought periods, when we had the 3-year drought, we did have a lower drawdown in the wells, and we monitor that, but it did rebound once the drought ended. So to date, we have not seen an issue with the aquifers that we pull from. Some of the shallower wells certainly are identified as being challenged, mostly to the north of the county. not necessarily at the south end. But it is part of that, the whole groundwater subbasin work is getting at exactly what you're talking about.
So if I heard you correctly, it sounds like the aquifer does recharge fairly well. And I was just worried, I do a lot of hiking in the hills and it's dry as hell up there. And so I was a little bit surprised and pleased that it does replenish. A second area has to do with water loss, and I was curious about that, but I sort of assumed that a good part of that has to do with leaking pipes or something. And it seemed to me that Davis expanded rapidly in the 50s and 60s, so that our infrastructure is getting quite old. I was wondering if there's a danger of infrastructure deterioration so that your assumptions, historical assumptions about water loss, things might get worse.
So from a perspective of infrastructure, we do have a 10-year CIP improvement plan related to our pipe infrastructure specifically. To your point, yes, we have a lot of aging infrastructure that's in the ground. I will say, honestly, some of that infrastructure actually is in better shape than some of the newer pipes.
Well, and hopefully better than our road infrastructure.
No comment. So, but we're finding, in fact, we were just discussing before the meeting started that the way some of the standards were when some of the infrastructure was installed, actually, we've come to find out was not the best method. So we're having to go back and replace a lot of that infrastructure. So, but we do have a 10-year plan. Actually, Brown and Caldwell assisted us in looking at that from a variety of factors. One is age is a factor, history of leaks is another, main breaks is another factor, there's a few others in there. So we do have a 10-year CIP to replace that, and that's an ongoing, no matter what infrastructure you have, you're always going to have some value associated with replacing that infrastructure on a cycle.
Just to add to that, our water crew is also using those 75 acoustic leak detectors that I think I mentioned when I was here in January, I believe. So we had talked about those. So they use those and move those into different areas. They also can use those to help determine if maybe a CIP project is needed in an area if we're seeing a lot of breaks, or they can deploy them before road projects and other things are taking place to see, do we need to fix some infrastructure before we then go and put pavement on top. So they're using them for a variety of different reasons. Also to see other areas with breaks that we weren't aware of because they're not coming to the surface. So that we can be more proactive in trying to detect those leaks and to make those repairs. Not on the annual water loss audit side, but on kind of more the customer water loss side, replacing all of the meters in town. So that's not accounted for when we're looking at, the water loss numbers you're seeing here. That's our distribution water loss. But we have, more accurate accounting with the meters because those meters had aged out. So we weren't necessarily accounting for all of the water potentially. We have AquaHawk so that customers can hopefully catch water leaks more quickly. So we're kind of working on, the distribution side that's required by the state, but also trying to work on the customer side, both our city meters and our customer meters, and be able to reduce, water loss and allow people to more proactively be able to make repairs and avoid some of the, not just the water loss, but the cost associated with it.
So just a brief suggestion, you might want to change your vocabulary and instead of calling it water loss, call it groundwater recharge. I have more questions, but I want to let other people have a chance.
I've got a couple of things,
Well, okay, so I have a question about climate change. If I read correctly, your assumptions in there are based upon the medium assessment. And things I've read recently, including a report from the United Nations came out today, suggests that climate change is accelerating faster than what people have assumed in the past and that the models are underestimating. I wonder if you have contemplated some sort of sensitivity analysis to see what would happen if you went with a worse climate change projection.
Yeah, that, there's a range of information you can find, and this is a topic that every day, like you said, something just came out today where there is getting to be better information. In the past, the state, I mean, even now, they're happy with the qualitative discussion, you know, and so taking the best available information we have at this time and making an assumption to quantify that and incorporate it is what we're doing, and I think that's one reason why we update these every 5 years, because we can then, okay, what's happened in this last 5 years, what better information, what better assumptions should we make? So I think for the time being, that's what we felt was appropriate. It's also, you know, this plan goes through 2050, so we're just looking over the next 25 years. And so I think that we're assuming what's going to be in 2050 is also happening next year too in the planning. So I think that's, you know, it can always be discussed and done different ways. That's the way we selected to do it for this analysis.
I phrased my question somewhat carefully, where I used the term of sensitivity analysis, where you don't just use what looks like the most plausible assumptions, but then you look at a range of assumptions to see how sensitive your results are. And I'm not sure that your answer you just gave me led to that, doing that. Are you, in fact, I mean, I know it's time consuming and so on, but are you looking at the alternative assumptions?
We're not conducting a sensitivity analysis as part of this document.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. And yeah, I think a couple of those questions sort of were steering in the direction that I was wondering about as well. And, you know, obviously this sort of document is an exercise in assumptions and projections and kind of, you know, doing the best we can with the data we have available as to what things might look like in 5, 10, 15, 25 years. But along those lines, to what degree is the projection, kind of the methodology for those projections and the way they're quantified, to what degree is that defined by DWR and the statutes that, you know, require this process, and to what degree is that sort of up to the experts at Brown and Caldwell to make those decisions about how to quantify those projections?
Yeah, the Department of Water Resources does not, they just want some discussion on it and that you're considering it. And I would say in the scope for this project, this is not a climate change analysis. It's really a compilation of available information that's been conducted to date to apply for the assumptions for your demand projections or your supply analysis. And so on the supply side, we rely on what WUDQA has analyzed in the past for that supply, since that's the supply that would be impacted, that we're considering for this analysis.
Yeah, and that's helpful, especially with the climate change component, but also on things like the city's water conservation program. Like, how is that quantification happening to, you know, because there's a pretty substantial yellow bar right on that water demand graph, so hey, we're reducing that demand. So how are you quantifying like the city's programs and what that turns into, you know, acre feet per year?
Yeah, for the city's program, for this analysis, we assumed that they would help maintain a 5% reduction just to have a number in there for into the future to meet those urban water use objectives, especially if new developments, when they come in, they really are using those demands. The city's going to need to adjust their conservation program, but this didn't include an analysis of that because you really need to get those connections in to see what the demands are going to be. And so that, you know, for this planning, we assumed, okay, you maintain that 5%, but as every year goes by, the city has to reevaluate what they're doing and the effectiveness of that to meet those objectives.
And that's the urban water management plan is kind of our, you know, overarching planning document, but every year we do submit on July 1st the annual water supply demand assessment. We have been incorporating that like a 5% into that, assuming that we'll have a 5% increase in demand each year potentially, so that we're making sure that we have the supplies. And then we're actually looking at, you know, what supplies do we have available through WUDQA? When do we expect Turn 91 to go into place? That's a much more kind of, you know, it's an annual look instead of this like 25-year look. We also submit the annual water loss audit every year, so those are like the real numbers for water loss, and they can vary each year. If we have significant breaks, we could see an increase in water loss, so we have a downward trend, but that could increase one year compared to another. Our water use objective, that's a fairly new report, and I know we had discussed. We've turned that in for 2 years now, and that's based on actual demands and projections and supply. And so that's it actually changes each year depending on the amount of water that you're using. And they factored into that, decreases in the allowance for, evapotranspiration and the type of vegetation that you have. And those different indoor water use that go into effect. And that's why you see that line we're dropping just below it, is because some of those standards get very stringent moving into the future.
So I'd say, so that was a great I think it was, a great explanation of what's before you is a planning level document, and what Dawn's speaking to is a lot of the nuts and bolts that we put together every year to actually assess where are we. From that perspective, there's, while it's overall planning, there are certain assumptions in that, and then we drill down year over year, and then that informs us in the next 5-year planning document. I will say a little bit on you've heard Term 91 throw it out a little bit with what some of you may have heard me chat about it before. But from a perspective of climate change and surface water supplies, WUDCO has done analysis on frequency of Term 91, both in the past, but actually looking toward the future, because we know the past is not a good indication of the frequency of Term 91. So WUDCO actually a number of years ago now, I want to say it's three to 4 years ago now, did a full analysis with a different engineering firm that does that type of modeling. Went through that full analysis of Term 91, what would that mean for our supplies, what type of year would we need to go out on the market and buy some water for the partners, those types of things. So that urban water management and planning document from WUDCO feeds into both Woodlands and ours. From a perspective of looking at climate change specifically, WUDCO kind of takes the lead on that from a surface water supply perspective.
All right, I think those are all the clarifying questions I have. Do we have any more from the commission? All right, hearing none. Oh.
If you don't mind, if I could just ask one question of staff, because they're here and they're giving us all this great information, and it's tied to something you asked earlier. Maybe you cover this, but I didn't catch it. What's the data source for the population projections that drive these demand projections that you have? Who provides the population growth data?
The population, the one source is the Department of Finance, but the growth projections are based on a couple of things. One of them is the known and anticipated future developments and the timing of those, and how many residential connections there will be, and the assumption of how many people per dwelling unit for those. And then the other component, I'm blanking on the name, but there's a projection from the housing.
The REMA stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was kidding. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's super helpful.
Okay.
And I won't ask you if our failure to update our general plan makes this challenging. I completely appreciate it, and I understand. And I can see why you would use Department of Finance data at this point. Completely understand. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right, if there are no other clarifying questions from staff, we'll go to public comment on this item.
It's wonderful we live in California that these sorts of planning documents are in place, because they assure some sustainability, even though we are vulnerable to assumptions, and we know, watching environmental statements, that assumptions can be fudged to get the results you want, but I assume there's no bias in this process here. I'm also want to comment, we should reflect back on the city council members from 12 years ago who put in the water supply. In the chart on page 5-6 about groundwater levels that are stayed stable reflect that sort of foresight. So we are really standing on the shoulders of the people who really did the heavy lifting, bring the water system in. But in terms of other questions here, I know we have gallons per person in here, but this is Davis. and we have a tremendous amount of green space here. I got twice the number per capita, 3 times the number per capita of parks of any other city in the state, I think. So I think this is a cookie cutter report. We should be asking for gallons per tree, because the trees are a big use of water, or gallons per acre, which is because landscape really drives water much more than the population, because landscape actually uses much more water per capita. So we should be asking for that, so this is not just cookie cutter, because that's really important in terms of maintaining our quality of life here. And so that's missing here, but I don't know, I'm glad it's, but I don't understand on page 4-3, they have total water demand, that seems to flatten in 2036. And I understand water demand is calculated by gallons per person times population. And the gallons per person is flat on the chart on page 4-11. So I don't understand how, is population flat in 2036? I just don't understand that. Is that the projection? I mean, that's really interesting. I think we should ask it a population number, because that's a key assumption in here, and that should be made explicit. Because the assumptions are the key of any sort of projection here, and they should be made much more explicit in this report. Again, I think this is good that we're doing this thing, and we go deep on this thing. I also think having one data point is not very helpful. We should see what would be a comparison of the same charts for Woodland, for Winters, West Sacramento. How is it different? How are the gallons per person, total gallons used? How does that look? So we can understand, because we're just dropping in on it. I'm sure these people have done hundreds of these things. They know how this works. They could generate some comparative charts. That would give us some calibration, and also how much work we need to do in terms of reducing our gallons per use, and also gallons per tree, of course. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other comments from members of the public? All right, seeing none, so we'll bring it back to the commission here, and I believe this is an action item, and I believe the recommendation we have from the staff report is consider, moving to approve this, supporting the adoption of the urban water management plan by council. So that's kind of what's in front of us today. So we'll open it up for discussion, and I can leave it to Ann for clarifying questions. So Jim, do you want to lead us off on discussion on the action here?
I'll just take off on something that Alan said I haven't thought of before in terms of projections. My personal experience is that far and away the most water that I use in my home is the landscaping, not inside. And the new housing developments all have smaller outside yards and so on. So I would think that would lead into the projections that the per capita would be less given the reduction in landscaping. I don't know if you've taken that into account. Then the only other thing that I would say, and maybe this is moved from what you people have said, but I think this for the kind of plan that the state requires, this is a wonderful plan. It's excellent, but I'm pleased to hear that the city is going beyond that and doing year-to-year things and so on. And as part of that, I would hope that you don't just take that study on climate change that was done 3 years ago or something, but that you look more carefully at climate change. Some numbers that really stuck out for me in reading your report was that currently we have about 4 days per year over 104 degrees, and it's projected to go up to being at least 24. And I'd say, given what I've read, the climate change is accelerating, and given what's happening to our federal government right now, that maybe instead of 24, it might be 30 days over 104 degrees. And what does that do for water use, not just inside residential, but landscaping and so on? So that maybe the city would do that kind of further study. I don't know that that's necessary for the purpose for this report right here. I did think the report looked really good to me.
So, well, to address some of the questions or comments. At the state level, CalWEP has been pretty active in doing some of those types of studies or starting some more research on those types of studies to see, especially on the CII on the commercial side, both for irrigation and for the indoor commercial use. There's a lot happening in that realm right now. That the water use objective, that really does get into both just residential irrigation and commercial irrigation. It doesn't tease out the residential irrigation necessarily from the overall, because usually it's on 1 meter, but it does have that standard that lowers over time. Often, what I've heard is that the new developments, yes, are going to be using less water with the requirements from the model landscape ordinance and the non-functional turf for the commercial properties. We will see a decrease there, but with increasing climate change, we could potentially see an increase with other properties.
And there'll be a lot of trees in those developments.
And there's trees that need watering. There are a lot of other, things that are in consideration. So there are studies that are happening now to get a better feeling for how will, non-functional turf affect trees or affect overall, reductions in irrigation. So a lot of that's happening just with it, starting now and kind of moving forward. So we don't have a lot of that information yet. It's actually on a call earlier today, and we were talking about a tree health panel for the upcoming CalWEP conference. And they're planning on having some people speak from Nevada because they've had some of these ordinances placed a little bit longer than California. So there are some studies there, but they're kind of bemoaning the fact that there's not a lot of quantitative data yet. But that is happening, and those studies are starting to be done now that some of these regulations are in place. So I suspect when we're back here in 5 years, we'll have a lot more information to be able to bring to you to discuss that more.
I really thought the plan was informative. I found it reassuring. I particularly liked the water shortage contingency plan discussion and digging into that. And so I found it incredibly informative and reassuring. And I think, as we get more information, you're able to fine tune all of this. I mean, there's so much that we are studying and need to learn. But I agree with Jim that this plan is, it seems well thought out, well conceived, and I recommend moving forward.
I don't have anything substantive to add. I would move to approve this to go to the council for discussion and anything else.
I think that was a motion, I'll second
I
it.
was going to say, we have a motion and a second. So, yeah, I think I agree. I feel like, there's nothing in this report that I'm seeing that feels like it misses the mark anyway. Clearly there's a process here for these things. I will add that Melanie, I noted in a couple of your responses to clarifying questions about the sensitivity analysis and maybe looking at some of the demand projections, that I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that there might be some components of what we're asking where you're kind of saying, well, that's not in our scope for this project, which is a totally reasonable answer. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, we definitely have a scope for this project.
Yeah. And so I think what I might add to this commission to consider is that that might be something we think about separately, or otherwise, consider sending back to council as potential additions to the scope in the future. Obviously, there's time and budget constraints to go into these things, but if these are data points or types of analyses that might be really helpful for planning purposes, I think that's something we could consider recommending, or otherwise. I wouldn't necessarily say we want to put it in this motion, which we have on the table right now, but that could be a follow-up potentially as one way to make those comments in addition to recommending approval of the UWMP as the motion currently stands. So I just wanted to add that in case there's any discussion there before we maybe move forward, or is there any more discussion on the motion in the second that we have? All right, so no more discussion on that one. I say we go to a vote on the motion that we have on the table. So motion, I believe, Sarah, was to recommend that the council review and approve the urban water management plan. I don't know if I got the phrasing perfectly, but I think we have recommending the staff recommendation. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so we'll go to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much to the team here and staff for presenting that. And yeah, I believe, is there anything else on this item before we move on? All right. Excellent. So thank you very much again for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, as we voted to table item 6B until a future meeting where we have a broader representation of our commission here, that will, I think, bring us to item 7, the long-range calendar.
All right, thank you. So we can go ahead and move the item that we discussed earlier to April. It's a little bit busy, so we can kind of have the time marks out there and see if that works. Right now we have solid waste annual report, Greener Davis outreach presentation, and then the discussion around the restart of the environmental recognition awards. As well as a May meeting date check, because May follows on Memorial Day, and there was limited time frames for a reschedule, so we might consider canceling that meeting if it seems reasonable, or we can decide the next meeting. The only other thing I wanted to note was that I reached out previously about the general plan, I think it's called Commission Palooza, for April 13th at 5 p.m. So that was just something I wanted to put on your radars again now that we're trying to get a little bit closer to it. No further details at this time, but I think we'll provide them as it becomes available.
Thank you, Sam.
So just a quick question, since we mentioned general plan. Just out of curiosity, Sarah and I were nominated to be on some committee encompassing all the commissions, and I've never heard anything about that, never met.
Also, I have heard nothing.
Oh,
I have also heard nothing.
yeah. What's happening? I mean, is this indicative that nothing's happening on the general plan?
Yeah, I'd have to check in with the community development director to see where that's at. Unless you're,
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for that. There was an email, and I'm sorry that I didn't come to all of you because other people have been asking for a little more information about what is the calendar, what does all this whole process look like? And there was an email that went out to planning commissioners, I believe, and I'm sorry that you weren't copied on it because it talked about the process a bit more. So no, it does not mean nothing's happening, and you will get brought into this loop, and I'll kind of make a note of myself to circle back, same thing you're gonna do with Sherry and Ardera, who sent out an email recently about the process.
I mean, it ties in a little bit to the item on our agenda that we didn't do today, and that's our relationship with the Transportation Commission. I mean, you know, it's that sort of thing that was the thrust for having this meeting of people from all the different commissions to see how our work overlaps and interrelates. So I think we take that seriously.
Thank you, Jim. And so I believe we do have a public comment item on the long-range calendar. So any other clarifying questions on the long-range calendar before we go to public comment? All right, so let's open public comment on this item.
Hi. First, an ADA comment. I can't read these signs in the back. They should be bigger so we can see what people are playing in the future. I made a comment earlier about the tree report. You should put that on your agenda, have the tree report, how many trees are planted, how many removed. We should see that, and you should talk about the budget for the next year. This is the most important time. You need to put that under. I have a list in the email I sent you all of things you should be asking for. In addition, one thing I thought of was basically, if you're taking out big trees and putting in small trees that are not going to get big, and you're taking out oaks and putting crepe myrtles, you're cutting down the canopy. And the city can make a projection about what the size of the canopy, the ultimate canopy is going to be. If you're taking out an oak and putting in the crepe myrtle, they can make a projection what the canopy ultimately will be. So I'd add that to this list of 9 points. So please put that on your long-range calendar and make it an action item. And also, please, we're beginning the budgeting process. Unless someone speaks for the trees, unless someone speaks for the environment at city council meetings, the agenda is not going to be considered. So please show up at the city council meeting and speak for making sure that there's a robust tree budget, not just for the trimming of the trees to make them safer, but also for planting. Because I don't think we're planting enough trees. We had a deficit of like 100 trees last year. They removed 100 more trees than they planted, and small trees don't always survive. So we are in the hole in terms of meeting our forest management plan. And they have this increment by increment by increment to 40 years. So you need to be on it right now. So thank you so much. Put that on your agenda. And also, you had a bunch of assumptions you wanted in the future water plan. Unless you put that in a resolution, it's going to be forgotten. I have seen the staff in the urban forest management, they had a big thing. What do you want to have in the urban forest management plan? And there's all sorts of agenda items that came up, and they were all forgotten, they weren't even committed to memo. You need to put it to memo, because staff will forget the stuff, or they don't want to remember it or whatever. Like, for example, the urban forest management plan, there was a request for a fire projection of the thing, and that totally was lost. There were lots of things like that. You need to put things in writing. If you want those assumptions, all this good work you're doing on the urban water plan, you need to put those assumptions that they're going to be forgotten in 5 years when they commission again. Please, you can reopen that agenda right at this meeting, because it's an item, and put those in writing and pass a resolution. We'd like to have this considered for next year. I would urge you to extend the meeting another 5 minutes to capture all that good work you've done right now. Don't let it get forgotten, because it will be forgotten unless you put it in writing in a resolution this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. All right, if we have no other public comment on the long-range calendar, we'll bring it back to the commission. So, yeah, Ann, do we have anything else on the long-range calendar?
No.
Do we want to talk about April at all? Because it is looking like it's getting a little bit stacked up potentially with the commission-initiated task process. I expect that'll take a little bit of time, and then we have 3 other relatively substantial items on there.
We're going to finish almost an hour early today, so we can carry that extra hour over to April.
We can, the Greener Davis item we can probably move if need be.
Yeah, that seemed like an item that could move, and potentially even the solid waste annual report. Seems like there's some flexibility in when we get that.
Could be. I believe there's no regulatory requirement that comes forth. I'll double check.
I'm really looking forward to the solid waste.
It's a good presentation. I'm not saying I don't want it, but
Trash talk.
yes.
Trash talk, yes. We like our trash talk.
So yeah, I would maybe recommend just if Greener Davis is easy to move, maybe push that out a little bit just to clean up April a little bit.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion for the long-range calendar here. Do we have any other notes on it? And I mean, does it make sense to have? I guess we'll have the conversation next month about the May meeting. We don't need to get into that right now. Okay. Seeing nothing else, I think that concludes our agenda for the evening, and I would move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.